exam venue was settled at registration.
Right, so just a couple of notes on the assignment that you were supposed to hand in. This is obviously your last session for the year, so we're getting into the nitty-gritty of things right now. In terms of that, I'm just going to give some feedback. We're going to talk about any questions that you might have. We're going to be talking about the specific tasks that must still be handed in for the final POE submission. And yeah, as always, any questions you've got, you're welcome to ask. So, as I said, final submission prep for the specific module. And I'm going to give some feedback based on the marking that I did, things that I noticed that I'm a bit concerned about, or areas where I think there can be a bit of improvement, specifically with regards to your final submission that's coming up. So there's a rubric that we use, and one of the things that I did notice was that some of the answers were very, very, very short. So if you are giving me an extremely short answer, that can potentially create a problem. So the rubric marks you, and you've got access to the rubric. The rubric marks you based on knowledge, insight, and application. So if you are only using the textbook, you're basically shooting yourself in the foot. So the textbook is not, there's nothing wrong with the textbook, and I definitely want you to use the textbook, but it's an assignment. The idea is you go and find additional sources, and that there's some sort of critical discussion happening, that you don't just take things on face value. So you don't just say, well, oh, okay, this company does things in this particular manner. Go and check, are they actually doing things in that particular manner? Play devil's advocate here and there. Like somebody might say, but this is the best way of doing things. And then you look at the company you're looking at, and the literature says, well, manner A might be great for large companies, but it's not very good for a smaller company. So point out those sort of discrepancies and say, well, okay, this is actually a fairly small company. So the context in the textbook is all good and well for a large company, but for a smaller company, that's not really going to work. So I think we need to find a different way of getting things done. And in a smaller company, way manner B might be a more appropriate means of getting things done. So play devil's advocate a bit. Do additional research. Don't just rely on the textbook in terms of your sources. Application, that's you applying the theory, and again I needed to see some sort of linkage between the theory and the application. I wanted to see that there and make sure that was present. And obviously the insight comes from correctly being able to apply. The insight comes from, again, having read a bit in addition to the textbook. Then the referencing, generally the referencing wasn't too bad. There were some small things here and there, and for one, just note, and I've got an example for referencing that I'll show a bit later, but the surname goes first. So Varnich is the surname of the author of your textbook. Some people actually gave the full person's name. You don't give the person's name, you don't give their initials in the in-text reference, you just give the surname, and then the date. Inconsistent formatting, so some people would sometimes leave out the year. Some people didn't reference certain sections at all, and that's a slight problem. Or if you take two books and you reference the books differently, that's inconsistency. And then the final reference list must be alphabetical as well. Didn't have a lot of issues there. Most people did have their lists alphabetical, but did have some problems with inconsistency in referencing format. And then obviously also congruence. So what do I mean with congruence? That means that every single reference you've got in text is also in your final reference list, and vice versa. That part was actually fine. Your congruence was, I was happy with that. So it was just the inconsistent formatting here and there, and the alphabetical aspect not always being there. Then some other things, just clearly indicate what task or you're doing, what subtask. Here and there, I had people where I wasn't entirely sure, are they doing subtask A1 or subtask 2? because there was a bit of an amalgamation between the answers and I wasn't sure which one is actually like the primary one they're trying to answer. So just clearly indicate to me I'm busy with task 5, subtask 1, or whatever the case might be. And then lastly, the thing that I want to look at based on this slide is bias. Now, you are entitled to your opinion. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. I do not have a problem with that. I am just going to point out that this is unfortunately an assignment. It's not an opinion piece. It's not a social media comment. It's an assignment. So that means that every single thing that you say must be backed up. It must be referenced. You must be able to show me exactly where you got that information. And I understand that some people did actually use companies that they work for. I mean, your task was to use a non-JSE company and do your entire POE based on them, and that could be your workplace. That's fine. That's not a problem. But if you're going to make certain statements, you need to validate that. So that might mean, in your case, going to interview somebody that knows, or sending them a questionnaire or an email, asking somebody that actually knows the answer to what you're looking for. So if you're saying the company has 300 employees, I need that information referenced somehow. So like I said, if you end up asking somebody, all you do then is you reference the email or you reference the personal communication or whatever the case might be. But there needs to be a reference. And be careful about soapboxes. As I said, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but if we start looking at labor law especially, some of the statements that were made here and there, if that is made on the wrong platform, you are in serious trouble legally. The company can take you to court for making those statements. Don't assume that because something is happening, don't make assumptions about why it's happening. We've seen plenty of cases where people were wrapped over the knuckles at work and then have a whole rant on social media about how terrible the company is and how bad the manager is and this and that. Or they called in for a disciplinary, or they get dismissed or retrenched or something, and then they slander the company. That's essentially what it boils down to, slander the company on social media, and then the company takes them to court, and yeah, it's not pretty. So be very, very careful if you where you're getting your information from. It's not to say that your information is incorrect, but the problem is if there's no official scientific validation for what you're saying, it becomes very difficult. Because remember, people's opinions about places is exactly that, people's opinions. One restaurant that I might love, somebody else hates. I go, oh, the food's too spicy. They go, the food's not spicy enough, or whatever. It's personal opinion. And it's especially in this day and age where people, and I say this with respect, the general feeling is people get offended very, very easily about anything. Again, it's not to say there isn't any validity to your statement, but just be very careful if you're going off reviews or comments that were made on social media or feedback on websites and that sort of thing. It's not exactly a scientific source, so be very, very careful about that. Rather go with a scientific source that you can back up in terms of referencing. And that was my other big issue, is most people didn't have any additional research. The point of an assignment is that there is additional research, that you do additional work, additional reading. And because of the fact that you're only relying on the textbook, your argument is, I want to say flawed, but there's a gap in your argument because you're not looking at what other people are saying. There's no critical argument at all. And I noticed that you guys are now transitioning from NQF level 5 to NQF level 6. And NQF level 6, it's basically second year. That's where you start having to show a lot of critical thinking, and you need to show a lot of critical argument. You need to start combining sources and say, well, this guy agrees with this person on everything except for this point. Or this guy agrees with everything, but then also adds this. And again, I've got a little screenshot that I'm going to show you later. Also, for the, I'm going to use the same thing for the referencing. just to sort of show you what I mean by that. We do want to see the critical discussion. And as I mentioned before, a lot of people made unsubstantiated statements. If you're going to tell me a company does X, I need the reference for it. Otherwise, it's hearsay. And like I said, there's no way of checking it. There's no way of fact checking it. And in some cases, based on certain statements, I actually do need to go back and go and check. But listen, who said this? Is this a valid source? And on that, I don't have it on here, but also be very, very careful what sources you use. Here and there, people use sources that are not actually proper academic sources. And I know it's hard because actually the sources that were used were journal articles. And you think because it's a journal, it's fine. But if you look very carefully at the journal article itself, the language is extremely poor. So the moment that there's a journal article and the language in that journal article is poor, you know there's a problem. But what that basically means is nobody bothered to go and check the language use and the article itself and suggest corrections, because usually if it's a valid journal, what will happen is you submit your manuscript, somebody checks it, they make feedback, they give feedback, you're supposed to implement the feedback, and the feedback amongst other things includes language usage and so forth. So if you're getting an article that has dodgy language, spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, that sort of thing, don't use it. That's a fairly good sign that it's not a valid journal article. I didn't penalize you for it. I would have made a note about it, but just be aware. It unfortunately creates problems in terms of the validity of your argument. Also on that, in terms of your own work, proofread it. I kind of got an impression here and there that people were tossing things through. I'm not going to say it's a paraphrasing tool, but it's something that, because the synonyms that were used or the words that were used just didn't make sense in context, or the sentence itself didn't make sense. So be very, very careful with that. Proofread your work. And I understand English is a tricky language for some people. Most people, have somebody that is a first language speaker and can read properly and write properly. Just go over it and read through it and make sure that it makes sense. Because also, if there's spelling and grammar mistakes in your argument, in your assignment, it detracts from the validity of your argument. And also, like I said, sometimes the completely wrong word was used. So in that case, there is no argument you're actually making because you're using the wrong terminology. So just sort of be aware of that. Be careful of that. Right. So in terms of your referencing and in terms of critical argument, this is the example that I spoke about that I was going to show you. And you can see here it's the surname et al. With a year, or just the surname. And you can see there immediately in the first paragraph, I say to you, okay, well, this is what Deshmukh and Giovanni and their cohorts are saying, and then Machuca agrees with us. There's some disagreement from Machuca in terms of the emphasis on the failure to manage project budgets and costs. That he feels or she feels that that's a much stronger reason for project failure. You can see there also in the second paragraph, again, there's agreement, but the person also adds that this is an issue. So that's a critical discussion where you can blatantly say, look, this person agrees sort of, but not fully, or the person disagrees. And that's a critical argument. It shows that you've read more opinions, you are making a more informed decision in terms of your own argument, that you've looked at both sides of the story, not just the people that agree with something, but also the people that disagree with something. So that's sort of what I was getting at there. And again, the referencing there, you can see surname, comma, date, or surname and date in brackets. And all the statements I'm making are substantiated and so forth. Right. Okay, the other thing and this is something that if you were looking at the legislation, I just want you to pay attention to, is when you reference legislation, and we are looking at industrial relations. So our source of information is the Department of Labor. So when you are referencing your final reference list, you can see there that is the reference for an amendment or an act or a bill or whatever. When we're talking about our legislation, the city is Cape Town and the publisher is Government Printers. That's a standard. So for any labor legislation you are referencing, that's what I need to see in there. And in terms of the in-text, you can see there the author will always be the Department of Labor. And then the year will depend on what act. So the first one there in 1995, I think that was the uh, Labor, could actually be the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And then the one at the bottom here is the Employment Equity Act of 1998. So just in terms of how I would like you to reference the legislation. And then onto your tasks that are due. So task 6 deals with recruitment and selection. So you'll obviously go to your textbook for that, for the basic information. And again, all of this is still using the company that you have selected to start off with. The company is not JSE listed. So whatever company you used for task 1 to 5. And you can see here with task 6, both of these things must be included. So there's no choice here in terms of what you discuss both. So you're expected to conduct research on both of the following HR requirements facing your nominated South African company and provide a solution from an HR perspective. So if you are here only going to answer point number 1 and not point number 2, you are going to lose marks knowledge-wise. You're going to use marks application-wise. You're going to lose marks insight-wise because your argument is not complete because there's supposed to be 2 sections. So be very, very careful here. Both of these things must be addressed. So a recruitment process tailor-made for a position of your choice in your nominated South African company. Now, before I carry on with that, you need to tell me what that position is, because I need to be able to look at and say, oh, okay, based on this, the position, yes, you're on track here, or no, you're not. So you need to tell me what the position is. And it must meet the revised labor and employment equity legislation in South Africa. So again, I just showed you how to reference the legislation, and you need to go and look at the legislation. And again, bear in mind, Employment Equity Act was revised earlier this year. They promulgated it. So you need to go and look at the amended act in addition to because sometimes with the legislation, they only give you the amendments. They don't give you the previous stuff. You need to go and look at this act in its entirety, including the new part. So how do we come up with a tailor-made recruitment process for a position using this legislation, and then also provide different sets of ideas, behaviors, attitudes, expectations, and motivators of a Generation Z employee in the workplace. Now, this last part, the Generation Z employee in the workplace, that has been researched to death. That might be overstating things a bit, but it's literally, it's the trend of the day at the moment. So there's a lot of articles on this, and you can't look at your textbook. Your textbook does not have sufficient information on this. You need to go and find additional sources. And as I said, there are a lot. And when I talk about additional sources, journal articles. And again, it's something I've looked at to a certain degree. There are lots available. So you need to go and look at that. So you are advertising, recruiting for a position, and you are aware of the fact that you're recruiting people from Gen Z. What are you going to do about it? With consideration to the labor, the LRA Employment Equity Act. And then you need to also chat to me about their behaviors, attitudes, expectations, motivators. So your entire recruitment process must cater for how they behave, what attitudes they have, their expectations, motivators. And here I can tell you one of the things you might potentially look at is remuneration, and you might potentially also want to look at work from home, flexibility, that sort of thing, because that's come up a lot in the journal article. So just a bit of a hint, amongst other things. There are other things too. I'll let you discover that for yourself. But yeah, that is part one of your answer. Second part of your answer, a selection process. So you've recruited people, now you must choose them. Who are you going to hire? A selection process tailor-made for the same position in your nominated company that meets revised labor and employment equity legislation. So what does that mean? Labor Relations Act doesn't, well, Labor Relations Act basically says that an employee, a person who is, it designates who is an employee, one. But it also clearly indicates that an applicant for a job is given statutory protection during the recruitment process. So essentially what that means is you're not allowed to unfairly, that's important, discriminate against an applicant. Now what that means is that there is such a thing as fair discrimination. So that needs to feature in the discussion somewhere. And especially with regards to the new Employment Equity Act and everything that entails. Because there is discrimination happening, but it's fair discrimination. So bear that in mind in your discussion. So I need the position, the recruitment process as tailored to Gen Z based on their behaviors, attitudes, expectations, motivators. And then how do you select the candidate whilst fairly discriminating, if I can put it that way, based on the new legislation. Okay. Task 7. So here we're looking at employee onboarding, motivation, retention. You are expected to conduct research on any one of the following. So the previous task, you answered both 1 and 2. Here, you have to pick one of these. And again, pick the one that you can find the most information on. Don't pick one that you struggle to find information, because you won't be able to answer the question. So you've got your company, HR requirements facing your nominated South African company, and provide a solution from an HR perspective. An effective model for orientation for your nominated South African company. So come up with a model. So orientation models in companies is something you will go and research. In addition to your textbook, again, research. I need to see that you've looked at journal articles, and again, there's a lot of stuff on this. So come up with an effective model for orientation for your nominated company, or subtask 2, a valid and practical onboarding process and orientation program for your company. So what do you need to do to onboard new employees and orientate new employees? And remember, onboarding and orientation is a bit of a distinction there. Then the other option, the last option, so 1, 2, or 3. Subtask 3, your option there, a psychological contract meeting the expectations and requirements of both the employer and the employee. So you're not just catering for the employee here, you're also catering for the employer of your nominated company. So you will have to go and look at what is a psychological contract. And now that we're looking at this here, I need definitions. So if you're talking about a orientation, what is orientation? If we're talking about onboarding, what is onboarding? If we're talking about a psychological contract, what do we mean by psychological contract? So that should basically be the start of your answer. Psychological contract is this, in the context of this company, that would mean, and then what's the expectations and requirements? And again, additional research on top of your textbook. Okay, last one, task 8. Internal staffing and career management. So you're expected, and again here, so task 6 is the outlier where you answer all subtasks. Task 7, task 8, you pick one of the subtasks. So you tell me for task 8, I'm picking subtask 3 or whatever. So you're expected to conduct research on any one of the following internal staffing and career management challenges facing your nominated company. And again, If you look at your industry, there are going to be certain common challenges they're going to face with regards to staffing and career management. So use that as a starting point. Analyze and comment on your nominated company's approach to internal staffing. So how do so what is internal staffing? One, that's the first part of the question you have to answer. What is internal staffing? And how does your specific company approach that, if at all? And then comment on it. Do you think it's effective? Do you think it's not effective? Do you think it's partially effective? Why? Which things work? Which things don't work? Oh, sure, but we're not doing it at all. We probably should. This is why. If we did, this is how I would implement it. Then you have the option of subtask 2. And again, remember, pick one that you can answer. So if you're not privy to the company's internal staffing means, don't use that. Analyze and comment on HR's role in career management within your nominated company. So what is the importance of HR, human resources, the function HR, with regards to career management in the company? What is career management? What would you expect HR to do? Why is it important that they do that? What happens if they don't do it? What happens if they do it effectively? What happens if they don't do it effectively? Don't do it at all. So a balanced discussion based on additional research and your textbook. And then lastly, subtask 3, that's your third option you can do here. Analyze and comment on dual career couples. One of which members will be an employee within your nominated company and a program to address such situations. So again, you need to first tell me, what do we mean by dual career couples? What are the challenges dual career couples have? What are some of the issues? And how are you going to handle that? So again, you can't answer this question if you don't know what it is and the challenges they face and the good things and the bad things about being a dual career couple, and so forth. So what are your considerations in the company? How can you address the challenges? How can you address the good things, the bad things? What potential problems might you encounter as a company when you've got couples that have dual careers? Right. Okay, so that is essentially it from me with regards to that specific topic. Cindy, welcome. Any questions from your side? Any
No,
things that
ma'am,
you're
just
unsure
waiting
about?
for the marks.
Just waiting for the marks, yeah. I did submit the marks. Generally I was happy. Like I said, I gave a bit of feedback now in terms of where people went a bit off the rails. And like I said, unfortunately with the rubric, there's not, it's not a mark a minute thing where, okay, yes. It's you need to make a fairly solid argument. So the
Yes.
only real comment I can give, like I said, is use additional sources. Do not just use a textbook, because the moment you just use the textbook, then your argument, the knowledge level isn't as hundreds as I would like it to be. And
Yes.
also, like I said now in the discussion with regards to the tasks, give me the definition, show me you understand what they mean by it, and then be able to apply.
But in general, did we pass, ma'am?
Yes.
Oh, at least. Because I'm in 2 classes as you speak. I'm on economics on the side on my tablet and I'm listening to you because the classes are clashing. So I have to make a plan to attend your class and attend economics at the same time.
Oh, shame. Now I record, so I'm going to put this on the YouTube channel, so not a problem. And Cindy, like I said, if you get your marks and your feedback, and you're not sure about anything, please ask.
Yes, ma'am.
Like I said, it's I wasn't unhappy, but like I said, here and there is definitely room for improvement
Yes.
in terms of but actually that's also the unfortunate thing about a rubric is you're not gonna get full. There's always room for improvement.
Yes.
So it's never going to be full marks, but close enough. So like I said, just make sure that you look at the feedback, and if you're not sure about something or you want to ask, how could I have improved this, or I don't
Yes.
understand this, ask.
Yes.
You've got my email address. I've got the discussion boards open. Use them. Don't be afraid to ask. So, but
Yes,
listen,
ma'am.
I really actually don't agree with this. Why did you do this? Why? I don't
Yes.
understand. I thought this was good. What were you looking for? What's the gap? So please do not be afraid to do that. That's the entire point. That's how everybody learns.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Right. So any other questions from your side?
I think I'll have questions when I see the marks. For now, no, ma'am.
Okay, not a problem. But like I said, please, if you've got questions, once those are released, give a shout. I'll
Yes,
put an
ma'am.
announcement up for everybody as well.
Yes.
Okay. Great stuff. Okay, in that case, I guess enjoy your economics lecture.
Yes, ma'am.
Alrighty. I'll look forward to your comments later on.
Thank you, ma'am.
Right. Thanks so much, and have a great evening.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Right. Cheers.